Hello everybody! Today I'm going to do part 1 of my January reading wrap-up. I usually do weekly wrap-ups, but my reading rate has been so up and down so far in 2020, I don't have quite enough to talk about consistently on a weekly basis. We're just gonna do part 1 and part 2 instead. On January 1st, I read an entire book in just one day because it was that good, and it was Because Internet: Understanding the New Rules of Language by Gretchen McCulloch. This is a nonfiction book about how internet language has evolved, like it's a new form of like informal written language. This is a fascinating topic, and it was a real blast from the past for me because I had really last read about this issue of how the internet would affect language like 15 years ago in my very first university course, which was an English class where we had to read about the topic and then write an essay on it. And let's just say that over the past 15 years, a lot of questions that people had, a lot of concerns that people had about how the internet would affect like children and teenagers' ability to write well and everything, a lot of those concerns don't seem to have appeared. And we actually have enough data now to answer some questions, and it's really interesting. I just ate this book up. It was exactly what I was interested in, and I knew a little bit about it and how things have changed over time already. It was great. A lot of this book is Twitter-based because of the huge amount of data publicly available through Twitter and the fact that it is all basically informal language where people are not adjusting how they communicate because they know they're being studied. And that was also very interesting. I think maybe that's part of why we have some answers about things, is because we're able to get data in a very different way and enough data to do some pretty serious analysis on it. But yeah, if you were at all interested in online communication and this idea of internet language, I would recommend reading this. I was so enthusiastic about it actually that my dad also read it. I think his reaction was kind of more, yeah, okay. But then he is also an old internet person who's a little bit more prescriptive when it comes to language than perhaps I am. But anyway, it was very fun to talk to my dad about this. Then I read Outside the Gates by Molly Gloss. This is a dystopian fantasy novella, and I did an entire review of it if you would like to know more. I really enjoyed it, and I think I read it at the perfect time where everything about it just clicked with me and how I was feeling and what I wanted to read at the time. Then I read Finder by Suzanne Palmer. This is her debut science fiction novel. I had previously read some of her short fiction, which was really fun. This book I listened to on audio, and I'm so glad that I tried it this way. The style, the tone of the narration, and the humor in it worked so much better when I was listening to it than when I was trying to read it. And I think that the narrator of the audiobook did a great job. He was really, really good. So this book is about a man named Fergus Ferguson. He's basically a repo man, an investigator. He shows up on this like little planet station searching for a ship that he is going to repossess, and he gets dragged into like this political power conflict in the system. There's a lot of stuff going on there, including an alien species that just shows up in these triangular ships and terrorizes people, and maybe sometimes they take people and change them and stuff like that. It was a really fun adventure in space. I did not feel like any part of it was very original, but it was very good at what I think it wanted to be, which is like a heist in space. Thoroughly enjoyable even if it wasn't original. Palmer made it her own thing. The one thing that I did feel wasn't so good by the end is the length. There was a point in the story where I felt like we had reached the climax, we had reached the end, this was the place to end the story, and then it went on for another 100 pages. And it just felt like it was dragged out a bit too long with too many weird pre-climaxes before the actual end of the book. But other than that, very enjoyable. I believe the sequel is coming out later in 2020, and I will definitely also try to listen to that one on audiobook. I would love to continue adventures with Fergus Ferguson. And then I read another novella, The Deep by River Solomon and the Members of Clipping. I really enjoyed the song version of The Deep when it was nominated for a Hugo Award a couple of years ago, and when I saw that Solomon was going to collaborate with Clipping on a story version of that, I was really interested in how that would actually work. I think it was good, but it just didn't resonate with me, and that may have been part of my mood at the time I was reading it. This novella is very much about history and memory and pain and suffering and generational trauma, and when I read it, I was really not in a mood to be reading about those kinds of things, so that could be a large part of why I didn't really enjoy it that much. I also ended up feeling like the main character, Yetu, was mostly a blank slate. I never really got a good sense of what her personality was like, other than that she was in pain for a long time and wanted to ease that pain. And by the end, like, I liked the conclusion, the solution, that things were going to change in the future, but it also just didn't quite gel for me. I think perhaps this is a story that has so many ideas, so many things it wants to talk about, but not enough plot, not enough actual story to tell, and it's not long enough to really unpack and develop the ideas or the characters that much. However, I know other people have found this novella to be so meaningful and powerful. I feel a bit bad saying that I didn't get it, but ah well. If you don't know, the premise of this story is that the babies of pregnant African slave women who were thrown overboard during the slave trade survived and basically became mermaids, and they developed their own civilization under the water. And because their history is so painful, they forget it, except for one person who carries that history and memories for them and shares it with them periodically and then takes it back. And that character, the historian in the story, is Yetu, who finds it very difficult to live with the burden of constantly remembering their painful past. And I think it is a brilliant idea. It's so, so good. But this particular execution, like I said, just didn't do much for me. Then I finished the Moomin Family series by Tove Jansson with Moominpappa at Sea and Moominvalley in November. Moominpappa at Sea has got to be my least favorite out of all of the Moomin Family stories. And it's not that it's bad, it's just that I have to admit, I got so irritated with Moominpappa for basically dragging his entire family off on his little midlife crisis adventure. I really liked, I think it's almost like a version of this story that was better, called The Secret of the Hattaffatteners, which is from the story collection in the Moomin Family series. And I think it has the same theme about Moominpappa looking for something, trying to find that thing that he thinks is missing in his life. But in that one, he does it on his own and doesn't like massively inconvenience other people. But in Moominpappa at Sea, he does drag everybody in the family off to live in this lighthouse on an isolated island, and he says some things that make it sound like he wants to be the kind of masculine breadwinner of the family and everything. And it felt to me that for most of it, Moomin Mama was just indulging him, and she knew he would snap out of it eventually. Which is kind of true. Moomin Mama is usually right about that. So there were parts of it that were really good, but on the whole, I just couldn't shake my mild irritation with Moominpappa's actions. And then Moominvalley in November was one of my favorite books in the series. I gave it 5 stars because not only was it just really good, but also it was kind of a rating for just my feelings about the series overall. It deserved at least one 5-star book. This book is interesting because it doesn't actually feature the Moomins. I think it takes place at the same time as Moominpappa at Sea, so the family is at the lighthouse, but none of their friends know where they are or if they are coming back or not. And so it is about a bunch of their friends coming to Moominvalley, looking for the Moomins, and living in their house while they're gone. I suspected after the first couple of chapters that this book was about grief, about loss. And so I went to go read about it, and I was right. Jansson wrote this book right after her mother died, and that was kind of a juncture in her writing where she kind of moved from writing children's stories to focusing more exclusively on her adult fiction. And I think that she wrote this book about grief because she was grieving for her mother. And talk about right book at the right time. I needed to read this. It was so good, and I don't know if children reading this would get it or not, or if it would express in a way that children can't understand what loss and grief feel like. It was just marvelous. Then I read The Menace from Farside by Ian McDonald. This is a novella that takes place in his Luna universe, though I don't know if it takes place before the events of the novels or not. It seemed mostly disconnected from the events in the series proper, and it was very YA-ish. It's about a group of 4 teenagers who go on an unsanctioned adventure to take a selfie with Neil Armstrong's first footprint on the moon. They say they want to do this and give the picture as a wedding gift to their parents who are about to get married. Yeah. In reality, the story is being narrated by one of the teenagers, Cherryh. She's being forced to tell the story to a therapy AI after the event. And the way that she tells it, let's just say I didn't really like Cherryh, and I felt the way that she represented herself in the story was very unflattering, to say the least. And I felt like the character herself was resisting any development that she might have gained over the course of this adventure. Like, she pretty much ends the story with saying, and nothing really changed, this is just the way that things are on the moon, and you know, I'm not a different person. And I'm like, actually, that really? So I didn't really like her that much, and I didn't quite like the YA feel of this, but it was fun in places, and I really enjoy the society on the moon and how it works and all the infrastructure and stuff that McDonald has thought of. It's a fantastic setting, and that's mainly why I read this. And the last book that I have to mention is a reread of Foreigner by CJ Cherryh. I loved rereading this so much. It was a buddy read with Kazan from Always Doing, and I plan on doing a separate review of this just so I have more time to talk about it in depth. But I first read this book when I was 12, and then I reread it now about 17 years later, and it was still very, very good. I enjoyed rereading it and rediscovering the characters and the events so much. So more forthcoming on this book. And that is it. Those are all the things I have read so far in January, and hopefully I will read enough to do a decent part 2 at the end of the month. Let me know if you have read any of these books, or if you want to, leave me some comments down below, and I'll be back as soon as possible to talk to you again. And until then, bye.